Hello, my name is Aramide Taiwo and I am a recent graduate of the Master of Environmental Science program at TRU. I'm excited to be here and I'll be sharing with you my research, which is titled Application of Capillary Electrophoresis for the Determination of Organoarsenicals in Water Bodies Close to Poultry Farms. That sounds long and complicated, but I'm going to break it down. I am very passionate about the environment. I am particularly concerned about water pollution. This is why I chose this area of research. Arsenic contamination in air, in water, and in consumer products has been a major concern for many years. Arsenic exposure has led to the death of millions around the world. One way in which arsenic is introduced into the environment is through organoarsenicals. Organoarsenicals is simply organic arsenic. So it's the organic form of arsenic. And they are not harmful, unlike arsenic. This is why they are used as feed additives for poultry birds. They help in pigmentation, they improve the general growth of the birds, and they also serve as antibiotics. To the birds, they pose no threat at all. Typically, 4 days before these birds are released into the market, the feed containing organoarsenicals is withdrawn. So this gives them enough time to excrete up to 95% of the organoarsenicals. Which means, if you consume such bird, you will not be exposed to a significant amount of arsenic. So it is safe to consume such birds. However, their litter contains up to 95% organoarsenicals. So what happens to this? It leaches into underground water. When it gets into underground water, through microbial activity, the organic arsenic, that's organoarsenicals, is broken down into the inorganic form of arsenic. And this is toxic. So this is the one we always run away from. The inorganic form of arsenic is released into water. The marine, the aquatic life can consume it and it poses a threat to them. Also, some plants like rice readily take up arsenic from the ground. If you eat such plants, you're exposed to arsenic. Through some phototransformation, the arsenic in water is released into the atmosphere, which means we can also breathe in arsenic. So, it is a huge possibility that poultry farms are contributing to the amount of arsenic in the environment. This is what I explored in the past few years in my research. So what I did was I developed a method using capillary electrophoresis to determine the exact amount of organoarsenical in water bodies that are close to poultry farms. Capillary electrophoresis is an analytical technique that separates different analytes. It is very efficient, it is rapid, and it is sensitive. Before now, some other techniques have been used to identify the different arsenics in water sample, but they are not specific enough, which means that in a water sample containing organoarsenical and inorganic arsenic, these methods will tell you it contains arsenic without differentiating which is which. But my method is able to tell what type of arsenic is present in water sample. So I developed a method using this technique. I collected water samples from poultry farms that are close, poultry farms that have water samples. I collected water from their tap, I collected from the well, and I collected from rivers. I also collected water from the trough that these birds drink from. The other good thing about capillary electrophoresis is that it uses only a small amount of sample, so it is environmentally friendly. I did this analysis over a period of 2 seasons, summer and fall. When I analyzed these samples, I realized that compared to water samples that are not around poultry farms, these water samples contained more amounts of organoarsenicals, which means these poultry birds truly release significant amounts of organoarsenical into these water bodies. And over time, like I said earlier, they're going to break down into the inorganic form of arsenic, which is poisonous. WHO has a permissible limit of arsenic, which is 10 parts per billion, implying that if you consume more than 10 parts per billion of arsenic over a long period of time, you begin to show symptoms of chronic arsenic toxicity, which is why we need to be sure that we are not consuming more than 10 parts per billion. When I did the analysis, I found out that some of these water samples contain more than 10 parts per billion of arsenic in them, which means that the use of organoarsenicals by these poultry farms is posing a threat to the environment. My suggestion, my recommendation will be that there be a reduction in the amount of organoarsenicals that these poultry farms are using, or there be a complete withdrawal of these feed additives, and other options should be explored. I was richly informed during my research. I found out a lot about arsenic and its impact on the environment, and it is sad that this is another way that arsenic is introduced into the environment. So the next stage of this research will be to find how to collect the arsenic that is already released into the environment. I will be pleased to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Kyley Drach. I am a master's student at TRU working under the supervision of Dr. Heidi Hooten-Henley, and I've been looking at the chemicals that are found in menstrual products and what impact those chemicals have on the menstrual cycle. So just a little bit about me to start. As I said, I'm a master's student at TRU. I am also a graduate teaching assistant at the university, teaching first-year biology labs. And I also received my Bachelor of Science in General Biology at TRU prior. And I hope that after I finish my master's, I can go on to my master's in physiotherapy. So let's jump right into the research then. So if you were to add up all of the days the average woman spends on her period, you would find that about 7 years of a female's life is spent menstruating. So that means that women have chronic exposure to the sanitary products that they use. And that's a problem because the vagina is highly permeable. So it has a large number of blood vessels and it's protected by a mucous membrane. So this mucous membrane is what's permeable and allows for chemicals to be absorbed and enter into the bloodstream and then to other parts of the body. Many of the chemicals found in sanitary products are known to cause adverse health effects and are largely considered to be endocrine disruptors. So that means that they impact the endocrine system and they can affect hormone production. Some of the adverse health effects that these chemicals cause is the promotion of inflammation and endometriosis, infertility, and menstrual irregularities like painful cramps or increased bleeding. These chemicals include things called dioxins, plasticizing chemicals, phthalates, and volatile organic compounds. There's also the potential for pesticides and pesticide residues to be present in these products, which I'll explain in a minute. And some environmental groups that have tested these products have claimed that they've also found BPA, BPS, and glyphosate in some of the sanitary products that they've tested. So there's a variety of ways that these chemicals are introduced to sanitary products, and they mainly occur during the production of these products. So many of these chemicals are found in plastics that these products are made of, and they're also introduced not only through their use, but through the plasticizing process itself, which makes the plastics more malleable, more soft, and every major brand, or almost every major brand, of pads and tampons contains plastic. These chemicals can also be introduced through the bleaching process. Many companies claim not to use chlorine bleaching and instead use what's called elemental chlorine-free bleaching, but this still produces dioxins, furans, and other persistent organic pollutants. And almost every major brand of women's sanitary products also uses this type of bleaching. And finally, pesticide residues. may be introduced to these products through the use of non-organic cotton or other non-organic materials. And almost every major brand that contains cotton or some other similar material uses non-organic materials. Unfortunately, despite all this knowledge, there is still little data on the concentration of chemicals present in sanitary products, and that's because they're considered medical devices, according to the FDA. So some companies, these companies don't have to list what chemicals are present or in what concentrations either. There are a lot of reusable product options on the market now, however, and many of them claim not to cause any of these adverse health effects I previously mentioned because they say that they don't contain any of these chemicals, so they can't cause the adverse health effects. And this is because the reusable products are made of fabrics a lot of times instead of plastics. They use organic cottons instead of non-organic cottons, and they haven't been exposed to chlorine bleaching. Important to note, though, is that not all reusable products fit this criteria. So there's still a lot that are made out of synthetic fibers, such as polyester, which is a plastic, and they might not use organic cotton or other organic materials. And many of them are also dyed and likely bleached before, so introducing dyes can also introduce other chemicals as well that wouldn't be in disposable products. Aside from the adverse health effects that these chemicals found in disposable sanitary products cause, many of them can lead to the pollution of soil and water environments and impact the species that live there. And as I mentioned, these chemicals are mostly endocrine disruptors, and endocrine disruption can also occur in species that are exposed to these after the fact. So water species are especially vulnerable to this as well. And additionally, there's also a huge environmental impact in the form of production of waste from these products. So an example would be in 2018, 570 million boxes of sanitary pads and tampons were used in the US alone. And every year in the UK, the use of tampons, pads, and tampon applicators generates 200,000 tons of waste. So with all of this information in mind, I am hoping to assess the claims of these reusable products and see if they actually don't contain these harmful chemicals. I'll be doing that by conducting human trials, so I'm going to see if switching from disposable to reusable products with fewer chemicals will have a positive impact on the pain and bleeding experienced by women during menstruation. In order to do this, I'll be recruiting women between the ages of 18 and 40 and having them use their regular disposable products for about 6 months and have them track their symptoms before switching to reusable products for the next 6 months and tracking their symptoms as well. And I'll see if there's any trends in the bleeding and pain scores after the switch and see if those decrease at all. Besides the chemicals that are found in disposable products, there's also many other things that can impact the menstrual cycle. So I will be having participants maintain quite a few things during the experiment. So for example, diet has a huge impact on chemical exposure, and there's also many foods, herbs, and spices that have positive and negative impacts on the menstrual cycle as well. So I'll be having participants maintaining their regular diet as best they can and tracking anytime they include food in their diet that they typically wouldn't, or they've taken out a food that they usually eat when it's in significant amounts to kind of track that. Lifestyle choices also can impact the menstrual cycle, so things like alcohol consumption, smoking, water intake, exercise, and the use of other prescribed medications, to name a few. And I will be excluding anyone that takes hormonal medication, as well as smokers or regular drinkers, and any alcohol that does get consumed during the experiment will be tracked, as will water intake and exercise frequency, duration, and intensity. Additionally, disruptions in sleep patterns can also affect the menstrual cycle, so participants' occupation and work hours will also be taken into account for this. I'm hoping that my research will provide insight into the effect of various chemicals on the female reproductive system and will help to determine whether switching to reusable products with fewer chemicals will have a positive impact on the pain and bleeding experienced during menstruation. So I hope that with whatever my conclusion is, it will encourage women to switch to reusable options, not only for the benefit of their health, but also for the benefit of the environment. Thank you so much for listening. I am excited to talk with you after about this topic. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Hi, my name is Ted Morton, and I'm a second-year Masters of Environmental Science student studying under the supervision of Dr. Courtney Mason at TRU. And today I'm going to be discussing a bit about my research project. My research project is exploring how mountain biking is challenging sustainable development in British Columbia's rural and indigenous communities. So I'm going to start off by diving into my project and explaining a bit about the research, but it's important to get a bit of background and understand the scope of the research that I'm undertaking. So I'm going to start by discussing the industry which drives development in these communities. In 2018, British Columbia's tourism industry contributed $8.3 billion towards the province's GDP. This is more than any other primary natural resource industry, and it's more than forestry at $1.8 billion and mining at $5.2 billion combined. In 2016, mountain biking in the Sea to Sky corridor of British Columbia generated more than 687 jobs and paid over $35 million in wages. The economic potential of outdoor recreation-based tourism, and specifically mountain biking, is one of the primary factors that leads many communities and community leaders and the decision makers with policy to consider utilizing tourism as a way to diversify their economy within their communities. Currently, many rural and indigenous communities in the province that rely on resource extraction are having their livelihoods challenged by climate change, and they're considering how this is affecting the livelihoods of their communities. These climate change events, such as forest fires, mountain pine beetle, have decreased the sustainability of their primary industries, forcing communities to consider alternative pursuits in order to provide economic, social, and environmental sustainability. This leads into us discussing a bit more about adventure tourism. Adventure tourism is a subsector of the tourism industry in BC, and is positioned as one of the world's most desired locations for adventure tourism experiences. The adventure tourism industry in BC has evolved from the early pioneers to manufactured experiences. There is now heightened demand for these experiences to take people to diverse landscapes. It creates a more desire to explore our diverse land base in British Columbia. Consequently, heightened regulation, management, and the establishment of parks and protected areas are necessary to reduce the environmental impacts of the activities that are exploring these land bases, such as mountain biking. Now, in order to kind of go to the next step, we need to understand what mountain biking is. So, what is mountain biking? In my study, I'm looking at mountain biking as a form of commercial recreation, a tourism product that is created by trail construction, maintenance, and destination development. BC is world-renowned for mountain biking, and it's home to the world's largest mountain bike festival. We're also one of the pioneers of a new product, which is helicopter-assisted mountain biking. Mountain biking in BC is so successful mainly due to our geography. Our terrain is diverse and is perfectly suited for this pursuit. Trails are the key ingredient to successful mountain biking product, and they couldn't exist without the land base to do so. Now, you can see on the slideshow here, I've brought up 3 different images. We need to talk about the land ownership in BC because trails are an activity that take place on the land, and trail construction is disturbing that land. We're very fortunate in Canada to have large swaths of natural landscapes, And in BC, about 95% of our land is on unceded First Nation territory. From a land use perspective, the land base in BC is managed by the Crown, and that takes up about 94%. So 94% of the province is technically owned by the provincial Crown. This includes many of the parks, trails, and protected areas that outdoor recreation and adventure happen on. It's also important to understand this breakdown because the creation of boundaries such as recreation sites, trails, parks, and protected areas have the ability to displace or further displace Indigenous people. It also can reinforce colonial systems of land management. In addition, how land is apportioned and managed can constrain or again enhance economic, social, and environmental sustainability. So this leads us into discussing more about land management in BC. And historically, land use management in BC has been dominated by the power of the resource extraction industries like forestry, mining, and oil and gas. And that's had a negative impact in most places where it's encouraged conflict, reduced collaboration, ensured complications in the legal application of Indigenous rights and title. All these conditions coupled to climate change events establish the perfect storm of pressing land use management decisions at the provincial level. This can complicate the viability of adventure tourism as a source for sustainable development and reinforce a community's reliance on resource extractive industries. While mountain biking tourism, traveling for the purpose of riding a mountain bike, can be considered a sustainable tourism product that provides economic benefits, it's also well documented that it can also increase conflict within community stakeholders. And mountain biking, actually riding on trails or building them, can negatively impact soils, vegetation, and wildlife. I reviewed the existing literature and found two distinct gaps. One, understanding the complex power dynamics that form the traditional hierarchy of land management, and two, how land use decisions can constrain or enhance sociocultural and environmental development of rural and Indigenous tourism economies. This leads into the research objectives of my study. The research objectives of my study examine three kind of main areas, but to kind of break them down further for you, I'm going to simplify it and put it pretty basic. I'm looking at a loss of livelihood, climate change, and social inequalities, and how they're catalysts for transitions within rural and Indigenous communities. Many rural and Indigenous communities in BC are already considering mountain biking as a keystone tourism product. So this ties into the key objective by defining it and examining what is the level of responsibility being exercised by mountain bike tourism providers to rural and Indigenous communities as they interact with land use policy, reinforce or disrupt colonial patterns of land use management, and use public and private lands. I'm going to be conducting this research using mainly interviews. So my primary research is going to be focused on interviewing key rural and Indigenous stakeholders who've expressed interest in using mountain bike tourism as a form of development for the business or community. I'm using snowball sampling technique, which is going to give me a much more richness because I'm going to be able to see who's being interviewed and if there's someone that they recommend that would also add to the study. The other part of this is I'm going to be using community-based participatory action research. In this, it's this kind of research methodology where you get to be involved in the research and change can happen immediately. So the communities don't have to wait until a study's done to actually inflict change. The benefit here is by having a simple discussion with me, this could result in a change in their community right away once they've had a chance to reflect on it. So what are the hopeful outcomes with this? Well, this research will assist mountain bike tourism operators, rural communities, regional Indigenous groups, policymakers, and tourism planners with the creation of a more sustainable mountain bike tourism strategy, one that's better able to consider the history of land use management decisions and adapt to the dynamic socio-political and environmental conditions that are currently impacting the province. Although my study is focusing on the sustainable development of mountain bike tourism, it will also provide a deeper understanding of the land management patterns, power relationships, and policy frameworks that influence development in rural and Indigenous communities. Now, with all that being said, I really think it's time we go for a ride. Thanks.